It's time for our main topic, though.
Gosh, have we got enough time? We've been talking about everything else.
Yeah, we don't normally like to have this as a news-dominated podcast, but there is so much that we had to talk about this month.
Yeah, true. So, regenerations. I guess we want to think about what makes a good regeneration or a regeneration story, Dave, and just give some general thoughts on each of the Doctor's regeneration stories.
Yeah, that's right. So I've got an opening set of criteria if you're happy for me to go first.
Absolutely.
And I say criteria, there's really only two. I'm looking for a story that feels like a full stop to an era, that summarises an era and feels like that final farewell to a Doctor. And I'm also looking for a regeneration that, if I can use the millennial language, gives me the feels. That makes me feel something when I'm watching it. If you do both of those, you get 2 big ticks from me.
Okay, I've concentrated more on the regeneration scenes themselves and what leads up to them, so I'll chime in where I can.
Oh, that'll be good. That should be a good blend. And on that way, I think the 10th planet, which is obviously our first one, is going to be very interesting because it isn't a regeneration story.
No.
It's a story that at the end of it has a regeneration. The Doctor, there's no real foreshadowing of it at all. The story is not a summation of the Hartnell era. It's basically the templating of the Troughton era.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then suddenly, in the last 5 minutes, you get this thing going on. How did you find the scene itself?
Well, I think it's so simple and elegant and never seen before. It becomes the template for pretty much what comes in the future with most of the Doctors. You know, perhaps with more music or more emotion or maybe some more embellishments. But on the whole, the concept of the Doctor being injured or ill in some way and laying down on the floor of the TARDIS, particularly for the classic era. I mean, he does it standing up these days. But for the classic era, the Doctor laying down on the floor of the TARDIS and regenerating is how I think of Peter's regeneration and Colin's and, John's, I guess, was sitting just outside the TARDIS. So it was almost the same sort of thing, laying on the floor, and Tom. It becomes this template in a strange sort of way. And it's just so simple and elegant, and the first time they've done it, I find it quite charming.
I do as well, and I also have to compliment Hartnell's performance in it because he does start to build this sense of desperation in the Doctor, that something really quite profound is about to happen, something very weird is about to happen, and he builds it up very, very nicely, and you do feel as though, the guy's dying. You do feel as though this is a farewell moment, which, given that there is no build-up, and in fact he's actually offset ill for one of the episodes leading up to it, is quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I really like the 10th planet.
Speaking of regenerations tacked on,
Yes.
War Games has an entire episode tacked onto a story that's just about the regeneration.
It does. It does. Do you want to talk about the story in general first?
Yeah, so I think the fact that it has 10 episodes means that you really can't be building or foreshadowing from part 1. I think that would be too long. I mean, that would be the equivalent now of Capaldi starting to foreshadow, from about halfway out of the season. But you do get a sense in sort of parts 8 and 9 that this is just getting too big, that the Doctor's actually getting very stressed, and maybe we're not going to get out of this one in quite the same way. You do start to get that feeling as a viewer. It's not a very natural Troughton story. In fact, it's quite an unusual story, but it does build up well, and then that cliffhanger where the Time Lords are chasing him, the attempt to escape from them, getting to what we now know is Gallifrey, and that Troughton's forlornness. I think that what really sums it up is that scene in part 10 where Jamie and Zoe are like, "Quick, Doctor, let's try and escape." And he's like, "Look, I know we're not getting away, but if it makes you feel better, I'll have a try just for you guys."
Yeah.
What about the scene, though, the actual moments?
This could be heresy that I'm about to commit here, but I always thought this one was a bit silly. I know it introduces us to the idea that the Time Lords can choose their next incarnations. I've always thought the Doctor gets a random face because he's usually regenerating under duress and can't sort of sit back like an old Time Lord on Gallifrey and think about what he wants to be next and so on.
Yeah.
But you can be like this guy or that guy, and then eventually when he doesn't decide and they start spinning him around and he's saying, "Oh, you're making me giddy." I just don't like it.
I agree with you, and I have done ever since I saw it as a kid the first time on video. I do think it's a bit silly. The only reason I give it some points is for the moment beforehand where he realises that Jamie and Zoe will forget him.
Oh, hell yeah. Yes.
That should have been what the whole thing was like. And it's a shame it wasn't, but at least he gets that moment.
Yeah, very true. And I do like that moment. But the actual, I was going to say the actual regeneration. We don't see the regeneration. The closest we get to the regeneration where he's spinning off into the vortex, yeah, not good at all.
And I have read that people say you can see his face starting to change. I just thought his face was getting out of focus as the ability of the camera to get that level of detail ceased.
Yeah, they didn't have the technology to do that sort of thing, folks, at that time.
In contrast, I don't think that Planet of the Spiders is the best story to feature a regeneration. However, I think it is the best regeneration story because it is actually written as a genuine celebration of the era. They try to encapsulate all the themes and all the tropes of the Pertwee era into one. Yes, the car chase is indulgent, but it is part of the Pertwee era. The Buddhist themes, the environmental themes, the idea of, he's starting to control the TARDIS, and that's starting to work. The idea of something, a big spider is very Pertwee. But also down to the fact that Barry Letts has co-written this, Barry Letts has produced this, Barry Letts has directed this. So it is very much Barry Letts giving his farewell to an era as well, which is basically the entire Pertwee era. And they've brought back the cast. They've got Dalius from The Time Monster. They've got Boss from The Green Death. They've got Lynx from The Time Warrior. Just almost all of these cast members are someone who's worked with Pertwee, often in an important role across his era, coming back to say goodbye to him.
Yeah.
So I think it is a wonderful celebration of the era, and I love Planet of the Spiders for it. And then when you get to the scene, oh my God, Rob, take us to the scene.
Well, Dave, you say this is one of your best regeneration stories, if not the best. I've written here, I think this is one of the best acted regenerations. You have this pompous doctor admitting he had to face his fear and that it's kicked 7 shades of hell out of him and that he's lost. This admission of defeat, just as he, in quotation marks, dies, I think it's very good. I love it.
It is wonderful. It still evokes, a lump in the throat now. And the way it's done, Pertwee lying there with the Brigadier and Sarah there, and all through his era, that line, while there's life, there's hope, has been this real beacon of hope for us, While there's life, there's hope, and suddenly there he is, and there his dying words, while there's life, there's trails away. Yeah. It's a wonderful callback to that catchphrase, flipped around to make it just so wonderful and emotional. It's just a shame that the video effect is so dull. But who cares? It's a lovely, wonderful moment.
Yeah, as I say, I think it's one of the best acted regenerations.
When we get to Capaldi, I'm going to say this now. Mm-hmm. I said at the time that my favourite moment from the last series of New Who was Capaldi's I'd hope there be stars line.
Yes.
And that's what I think of when I think of Planet of the Spiders, and that's what I would love Capaldi's farewell to be. Something like that moment.
I got some thoughts on that, but we'll get to them later. Legopolis, Dave.
Legopolis is not in itself a summary of the Tom Baker era. In fact, the Tom Baker era kind of finished a year ago. We haven't got the usual companions. We've got Davison's companions coming in and just sort of taking over the show around him. And Legopolis is certainly not typical of the Tom Baker era at all. But that whole season builds towards the end of the Tom Baker Doctor. This guy who just, even today, towers above Doctor Who. Tom Baker remains for generations, for millions of people, the Doctor. He'd been there for so long, he was iconic. And there is this sense of build-up and of decay as season 18 goes on. He looks like an older man in state of decay. He is actually made into an older man in the Leisure Hive. Even down to the little subtle things, like at the end of Keeper of Traken, the grandfather clock is set to 4 minutes to midnight, saying there's only 4 episodes of Tom left.
Yeah, it's clever. And
then that sense of doom, the cloister bell, the brooding, the destruction of massive parts of the universe. And then he dies saving the universe. If you're going to kill Tom, he's got to go out saving the universe.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't small-time stuff saving one person.
Yeah.
He has to go this way. And you know, people are probably disappointed that we haven't mentioned the funereal air about this episode, so let's mention that just briefly. It does have a very funereal air about it. When I was a kid, and even as an adult, I love the scenes where he's looking at the Watcher standing across the motorway. You know, that seems so basic to some people, I guess, but to me, I always like how he's sort of looking in the distance across the motorway at this guy in the field, and it's like, oh, what's going on? You know, there was something about that even.
Did you think it was Peter Davison under there?
Well, afterwards, I think I did, you know, and people would certainly say that. You know, I don't know whether it's because it was a lighter coloured and you maybe think it's a blonde person underneath all that makeup or something. It certainly looks like the halfway point when he's regenerating.
Yeah, it really
Davo
does.
has that makeup on. I think that might, you know, be what tips people off that it could be Davo. Of course it's not. He was only there for the final scene. But yeah, I know what you're saying. But the regeneration itself, I always think of the music that goes with this, particularly as that camera, they've got it up really high. I don't think they've got it on a cherry picker because we don't have any sort of Castro valve like, as it comes down. But as the camera comes down from up high and we've got that plummeting, you know, music going with the sense that we're moving down towards the Doctor. That's what I remember most about the regeneration, and also the music as he turns into Peter Davison, the more sort of hopeful music, like here's his new life, you know, he's a new guy again, you know. That's what I think of as that. Also, it's got the line, I mean, for New Who, there's the famous line, I don't want to go, you know, from Tennant, and people quote that a lot, but I think for classic Who fans, it's the end but the moment's been prepared for is probably the most famous regeneration line, and it's a good one.
It is. I think it is the one that is most quoted. It is a wonderful, wonderful line. It's a wonderful, wonderful moment. I don't think there's much more you can say. I think that whilst Planet of the Spiders is the best regeneration story, I think Legopolis is the best regeneration scene.
Yeah, well, for me, as a scene, it would be out of Planet of the Spiders and this, I think.
Yeah.
Which brings us to Davo.
Caves is an interesting one because it doesn't feel like the rest of the Davison era, but he is so good in it. And it feels like a triumphant ending for him in an era that, you know, we spoke about last time has got its strengths and its weaknesses. It is a triumphant final note, but it is a desperate Doctor all the way through it. And he's effectively killed, like in effect, about 5 minutes into part 1. From the moment he steps in that Spectrox nest, he's toast.
Yeah.
So it is about him dealing with his impending death for 3.5 episodes and what that means and his guilt that he's led Perry into sharing his death.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, look, it's fantastic. You know, and it's so sad to see him in this situation because he's my Davo, Dave.
Yeah.
But isn't he so heroic? I mean, we'll put aside what I said on the Davo episode, which is, you know, why didn't they just take a slug of the bat's milk and then bolt for the TARDIS instead of him carrying her all that way and then spilling it? Putting that aside, I think that this is just one of the great regenerations, and that's one of the reasons this story is so loved. The dashing young Doctor is finally really, really dashing. You know, we have this sense that he's a dashing kind of guy, but he didn't really show it all that often. And in this one, oh my God, it's awesome.
And interestingly enough, and I didn't realise this until very recently, that moment in, I think it's late part 3, early part 4, where you start to see the regen effect and he sort of blinks his eyes and it goes. I'd always thought that was a sort of a space travel effect that just happened to be the same as the regeneration. But no, the intention was that's the regeneration starting. And he's going, no, I can't do this yet. I've got to save Perry. And he's pushing the regeneration away. Like he's on the edge of death then.
Yeah. So not just a New Who thing, folks. He has pushed it off in the past.
And it's also the first time they really go big on those special effects. It's not just the rollback and mix, or in the case of Legopolis, rollback and mix with a couple of interim shots. It is a full, you know, computer effect moment with that Beatles-esque, Day in the Life-esque crescendo of music. Does it work for you?
Oh, yeah, it did as a kid, and it does now. That visual, it's just great.
Sadly, his last words aren't as memorable as Tom's, being... Adric?
Yes, that is sad, but it's a good thing to know for trivia, folks. That comes up a lot in trivia.
Speaking of terrible last words, Colin.
Carrot juice.
Carrot juice. Look, needless to say, Colin didn't get a regeneration scene.
No.
He certainly didn't get a cause of regeneration other than, according to the novel, tumultuous buffeting.
Or according to Big Finish, a whole epic saga of stories.
Oh, I haven't heard that. Look, Colin made exactly the right call for the time. You can't sit there and say, I need to refuse all work for the next 6 months because for 1 week in that you're going to ask me at some point, I don't know when, to come and film a regeneration scene. It doesn't work though, does it?
Well, this is interesting because I saw this first at a Australasian Doctor Who fan club party at Sydney Uni. Now, we would watch these sitting in a big lecture theatre where there were TVs suspended from the ceiling, like, old-fashioned TVs hanging here and there around the room. So you had to sit sort of near one, and it still wasn't that big a screen to be watching it on. I saw it there first probably...
Well, it'll be 30 years ago.
Well, it would be 30 years ago, that's right. And it would have been a few months after it aired in the UK, something along those lines. And in that room, in that setup, and being excited to see it, I thought they'd done it really, really well, given the circumstances. Like, I knew that Sylvester was playing the Sixth Doctor and, that this would happen as it did. But to me, it looked really good. But it was only later when I saw it on a bigger TV, sitting right up in front of the TV, and I saw it was a lot more flawed. Like, you could see sort of Sylvester's hair under the wig. You could see that it was a wig. You could see that it was Sylvester. And I thought, this isn't quite so good. And, of course, the concept that he'd just fallen off his exercise bike and hit his head on the console or something was just bloody stupid. So, look, initially I thought this was actually very clever, and it was my first regeneration as a fan, not just as a viewer, which I think is important for me as well. It was the first one I'd seen in that sort of setting amongst other fans and, having read about it leading up to it in Doctor Who magazine and things like that. So it holds a special sort of place for me. I don't think it's very good at all, though, and my view certainly did change between when I first saw it and when I later saw it, in better circumstances.
It's interesting. I saw it for the first time in very similar circumstances, and maybe Melbourne fans are naturally more cynical than Sydney fans. I don't think it's helped by the fact that the line immediately before the regeneration is the infamous "leave the girl, it's the man I want," because that just gets the audience laughing, and then you get this really shunkily done regeneration, so you're already okay, this is going to be a bit silly, and oh my god, look at that wig.
Which of the Marx brothers, is it Chico or Harpo?
Harpo, I think.
Harpo, yeah. Gosh, he looks like Harpo Marx.
It does. It's worth noting, though, that if you believe the Virgin New Adventures, the Sixth Doctor actually drove the TARDIS into the Rani's beam and allowed himself to be killed because the universe needed the Seventh Doctor to be its champion and take over at that point.
I just find that weird.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, isn't it?
It's a concept.
It's a very New Adventures concept.
I'll go with concept.
Okay.
Speaking of, I need 4 New Adventures to finish the set.
Oh, well, that's exciting.
Anyway, back to the regenerations.
So, because of what happened in Tom and the Rani, there was no way McCoy wasn't going to do a regen, and there's no way anybody making the telly movie in the 90s would not have had the regen. Like, we'd had 9 years of fandom wisdom saying that it was absolutely terrible that Colin didn't regenerate into McCoy on screen. So it had to be done. Now, when we get to Rose, we'll talk about why that was a mistake, but you would agree, Rob, there's no way fandom wouldn't have accepted anything other than an on-screen regeneration for the telly movie?
Oh, absolutely. Casting my mind back to that era, it absolutely had to happen. It would be just disastrous if it didn't. And yet the irony is, I think it would have been better if Colin came back for his and Sylv didn't come back for his.
Yeah, because this attempt to launch the new series as it was meant to be, it turned out to only be a telemovie, but it was meant to be the pilot for a new series, struggles because you start off with your star as Sylvester McCoy. He gets killed about 5 minutes in. He then gets to sort of gurn on a table during an operation 20 minutes in. He's then dead for another 10 minutes. And it's sort of half an hour before you see him again. It's another 15 minutes before McGann actually gets anything to do other than go, whoo, oi, and walk around in a sheet. He gets about 20 minutes of dialogue, and then he just stands in there in that Clockwork Orange machine going, Grace, for about 10 minutes. It's a woeful start to him. And it's not helped by the fact that the first thing we see is there's a police box travelling through space. Then we see this guy in a room. Is that inside the police box? We don't know. But the regeneration, I guess what I'm saying, the regeneration hampers the telemovie. It allows it to not start until it's almost half over.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's got all that intro, as you're mentioning, like he's mentioning Skaro and Daleks and the Master, and he's doing this and that, and people will be thinking, what the hell? But yes, just concentrating on the regeneration. At the time, I'm going to put my neck on the line here and say I really liked it because I like seeing Sylve again. It had been so long since I'd seen Sylve, and he was finally in a good costume, and the TARDIS finally looked really good and gothic. And I did actually like all of that, but now that I look at it, I think, yes, we could have done without Sylve in it. The gurning looks silly. The Doctor basically as Christ in his shroud being resurrected is so heavy-handed. It's like, please, this is bloody horrible. And I really like McGann as a Doctor. I love him, but this is just horrible. Yeah,
I agree with you, actually. Again, I was very excited as a fan to see McCoy doing all that and part of the role and all the rest of that. It was really, really good. But in hindsight, it was a mistake. But I do love the irony that this Doctor, this arch manipulator who leaves himself notes in Battlefield, and he sets up the Daleks and the Cybermen to wipe them out. And what takes him out, it's not something big or cosmic or a battle of wits, or he finally belts off too much. He just sort of turns the wrong way out of the TARDIS and gets shot by a random passerby.
Yeah. Well, that was something he couldn't account for.
Yeah, there was a great irony in that it was just this accident.
Yeah, no, that is good, but I can't say too many good things about this one. Now, moving on from that, we've got a couple of regenerations that don't really have eras behind them, Dave.
No, well, I guess that's because they lead into and out of a Doctor who doesn't have a number and really was only in one story. And in fact, McGann was only in one story.
Exactly. So first up, we have McGann regenerating into John Hurt in The Night of the Doctor, 2013, just before the 50th anniversary episode dropped. Dave, did you like this little special?
Oh, look, it was nice to see McGann again. I can't really go beyond that, I'm sorry. It was just a nice little thing.
The concept, I guess, gets teased out a lot here, that particularly using the Sisterhood of Khan, a Time Lord can, choose what they want to be in their next regeneration. It drops pretty heavily the fact that he can be a woman as well. I think there's a bit of precursoring going on there. Yeah, I think so. I will be honest, I haven't watched this probably since 2013. All right, well, that's fair. I think for a lot of people out there, though, although McGann doesn't really have an era on television, at least, it gave them a taste of what could have been, and I think many people thought he might have done really well in the 50th itself. Oh, look, I certainly agree he would have done well in the 50th. I think at the end of the day, the McGann regeneration will have more resonance if you're someone who has been a follower of his in the books or in the audios. As you say, there is then an era to sum up. If really you're someone like me who all you've ever seen him in is the telemovie, and that was, over 20 years ago now. It was nice, but I'm sorry, it didn't resonate. Yeah, and certainly Moffat was canny enough to drop in him thanking a number of his companions, who are audio companions. So certainly some Big Finish listeners out there, hit the roof and said, woohoo, when that happened. Yeah. Moving on, of course, we have at the end of the 50th anniversary episode, John Hurt turns into... Well, he seems to turn into Eccleston. We assume it's Eccleston. Maybe they couldn't use his face for copyright reasons or something, because he just doesn't quite get there. Yeah, and, the Doctor's died of many things over the course of things, falling from the radio telescope, spectrox toxemia, massive radiation poisoning. I am pretty sure the Hurt Doctor dies from a severe case of plot convenience. Well, you may say that, Dave. I think it's more like the Hartnell regeneration insofar as his body's worn out, because when we see McGann turn into Hurt, it's a very, very young Hurt. It's a Hurt who could pop up in I, Claudius, for example. It's that kind of Hurt. So for him to have got to the stage of being a very old man for a Time Lord, I think that means he's lived an awfully long time. But it was kind of a convenience that he got into his TARDIS and did it straight away. Oh, I thought he just spent a few days as that Doctor. I thought the incarnation lasted like weeks, not millennia. Oh, hell no, no. This is why you need to rewatch Night of the Doctor. When he regenerates and we see him reflected in the golden chalice or whatever he's reflected in, he is a very young John Hurt. He's got thick, dark hair and no beard, and clearly he goes from that to being the old man. So he's been around for an awfully long time fighting this time war. That's what they're trying to portray there, I think.
Well, that certainly went over my head, and even that being the case, I'm sorry, I thought him just going, oh, episode's ending, better regenerate now. I thought that was a bit lame.
It was a bit convenient. What about us not seeing Eccleston's face?
Look, again, I didn't really expect to. I think that, as you said, it is a reflection of the issues of using an actor's image if he doesn't want to be there. So, no, I was fine with that. And let's face it, of all the things that get me excited about Day of the Doctor, John Hurt's, 1 hour Doctor regenerating was not a big deal for me. It's way down the list of cool things in that story.
Fair enough.
Which takes us to the parting of the ways.
Oh, yes. Now, please, talk about the episode, because I'm itching to talk about the regen.
I think that this is a wonderful regeneration story, and I think so far it's the best of the new series, because it does summarise and put a lovely full stop at the end of the Eccleston era. The Eccleston era has a very clear through line of the war-damaged Doctor learning to find his place in the universe again. In particular, a character that was wounded because he made the decision that he needed to sacrifice his world to beat the Daleks, now has realised that it was perhaps not the right thing to do, and he doesn't sacrifice Earth to beat the Daleks again. He says, I'm not going to make that choice again. So you get to see his character come a whole 180 degrees. He's surrounded by not just Rose, but Mickey's been a part of the story, Captain Jack's been a part of the story, Rose's mum has been a part of the story. So again, characters from his era have come back. We're back on the station. And so there is this wonderful summing up of an era. It grows to a crescendo. The Daleks help to build the tension. There are goodbye scenes. I think that this is a wonderful build-up and end of an era.
Couldn't agree more. I adored this episode. I adore both the episodes. And as we get towards the end, Eccleston's, have a good life speech to Rose. I watched that again just recently. I just picked that up on YouTube and just watched that scene. And I cried. It is really, really fantastic stuff. I love that she went back for him. I always chuckle at Jack's really over-the-top heroics, like, last man standing, Doctor! Is he firing machine guns in both hands? Like some sort of 80s action hero.
Yeah.
As he's saying, last man standing! But then you have this regeneration. And his explanation to Rose, she's playing the audience surrogate just like a good companion should. He explains to Rose what's about to happen because a lot of the audience wouldn't have seen a regeneration before. He's saying, might come out with 2 heads, might have no head, it's a bit dodgy. Oh, God, I love this, Dave. And yes, it is the best of the New Who regeneration so far.
And there's something that really resonates in the way that he explains it to Rose, because it sounds very similar to the way that we all have death first described to us by our parents. That sort of euphemistic, well, he's going somewhere else and you won't be seeing him again. And it's not an exact match, but it feels like that sort of conversation.
Yeah, you're right.
Particularly, you mentioned before, new series people like to quote the I don't want to go line. For me, and I think for a lot of my friends, Eccleston's line is the one. You were fantastic, you were absolutely fantastic, and you know what? So was I. And I remember at that moment as a viewer just thinking, wow, you've taken his catchphrase and you've turned it back, which is witty. You've implied in that he's now realised that, yeah, he is fantastic and he's learned to love and respect himself again, and that's special. And then he goes.
And we've got to note that, after he says, and so was I, almost straight away we have the and he's exploding, which he had never done before. He'd never regenerated standing up. He'd never exploded into flames. And as old school viewers, I won't speak for you here, but at least for me, I was like, Jesus Christ, what's happening? Oh my God.
Yeah. I was waiting for him to fall down on the ground and do a rollback and mix.
Yeah, exactly. So this was big stuff.
Yeah, big stuff. I really love the Eccleston era, and yeah, it's a wonderful full stop to it. I do think it's the best of the new series. I'll put that out there quite happily. Maybe to be topped in a month's time.
Well, I'd like to think it will. Just to so I'm thinking positively about this next episode, but I'm not sure.
David Tennant.
Yes. There's a lot of sighing there, Dave.
Yeah, I don't think I'm saying anything original if I say that it was a missed opportunity to not have him regenerate at the end of Stolen Earth.
Yeah.
I think that the Stolen Earth two-parter is the perfect regeneration story. It does pull together all the elements of that era, whether it's Captain Jack, Sarah Jane, all the companions, the references to Mr. Copper, for example, or who's the ex-Prime Minister?
Harriet Jones?
Yeah, Harriet Jones coming back for a little cameo. All of that sort of stuff, I think is a wonderful. It's a Planet of the Spiders-esque celebration of an era, and it is even more reflective of that because just as that was Barry Letts and Terrence Dicks saying goodbye, this is Russell T Davies saying goodbye.
And I'll just say, a lot of people like it or love it, and yet more people have it as a guilty pleasure. They don't necessarily love it, but it's kind of a guilty pleasure to watch.
Look, that scene where they're dragging the Earth back with all of the Murray Gold music and they're all flying the TARDIS, it is the epitome of fan wank, but it is wonderful.
Oh, yeah. Look, on one level, all the companions are there, which is lovely. On another level, a really geeky level, it's like, oh, look, the TARDIS is being flown how it's meant to be flown with, one or two people at each of the sections of the console.
Yeah, it is schmaltzy, but it is great. Unfortunately, it's not Tennant's regeneration story.
No.
and his regeneration story is kind of terrible. It's kind of all over the place. It's kind of silly. The Master isn't as good as he previously was. You've suddenly got Rassilon back for no apparent reason. Yeah, I just didn't care by then.
It really goes for it, like turning everyone on Earth into the Master, having those scenes where Obama is now the Master, and you can see it's just really, really trying to go for it. But I can't understand how the Doctor survives a fall in that second episode, far, far higher than he falls in Legopolis, yet he survives that. It's like, how did you survive that? You just fell onto a marble floor from like several miles high.
Well, that's right. I remember watching that and thinking, oh, that's it. He's about to go. Bring on the fireworks.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay. Yep, makes sense. He's just jumped off a spaceship. Fallen through the glass, shattered. Here comes the regeneration. No.
No, it's quite okay. Oh, no. The world tour then that he does after getting irradiated to save Wilf, and tours around the world visiting all the companions, which I've got to say, I watched my first Sarah Jane adventures the other day. I watched The Death of the Doctor. And in that, he sort of hints that he had went around and seen all the companions. So what we saw wasn't even all of it. And now I'm trying to remember whether it was a flashback to Tennant saying that or whether Smithy was saying that. Might have been Smithy. Might have been Smithy to Joe Grant.
Okay.
She was saying, why didn't you come back and look in on me? And he said he couldn't find her because when he was dying in his last life, he went around and looked in on everyone. So there's this hint, and because that's written by RTD, I guess RTD believes in it, that he went around and saw everyone, and we just didn't have time to see it all in the episode.
Yeah, look, the goodbye tour desperately wants to be loved, and there's a part of me that wants to love it, but it is so drawn out. It is a little bit problematic in that, well, these are the only two black people that I've hung out with, so naturally you're going to get married, and, oh, look, these are the two gay people I've hung out with, so you're going to get married, because, you're both gay, you're going to love each other. You're both black, you're going to be a pair. That is a bit unfortunate. I don't think it's intentional, but it is there.
Yeah.
But to me, a regeneration works because it mirrors death.
Yeah.
And death is not, well, I'll just go and have a bit of a goodbye tour. It's uncontrolled and it's unstoppable. And so this idea of, well, look, I'll die when it's convenient. And by the end of it, I'm just going, oh, for God's sake, hurry up. And it's a great shame because it could have been better.
I agree with all of that, but just on that note that, you can't hold death back, there is a moment where he's regenerating. The TARDIS is blowing up around him. I mean, that's a bit over the top. But there's this moment where he gets this really fierce look of concentration on his face, and it's like he's going to use his sheer force of will to stop it and to beat it down. Because you sort of start to see him regenerate, then his face sort of comes back into focus like he's fighting it. I actually really like that moment because I think it's realistic for how this character was. Like, he loved being him. He loved having that hair gel. He loved his long coat. You know, he was really into himself, and he didn't want to go, and he was going to fight it. And I actually appreciated that bit, even if what I was seeing around it I wasn't as enamored with. But whenever I see it, I always watch for that little bit, and that's the bit I like in that regeneration.
And this is the real shame. If you took that bit and put it at the end of Stolen Earth, you would have a really good moment after a really wonderful season conclusion.
Yeah, you would. RTD peaked too early.
Yeah, so let me flag now a fear for the end of the conversation.
Yes.
There is another Doctor who had a wonderful end of a season that was perfectly set up for regeneration. Mm-hmm. And he's coming back for a Christmas special.
Yes.
Just park that one, Rob.
Okie dokie. Which brings us to Smithy, Time of the Doctor.
What did you think of this one?
I think it's just horrible. Dave, it's not only a horrible story, but that scene with the regeneration energy and him shouting "Love from Gallifrey, boys" and firing off his hands into space. Oh, Jesus. No, thank you.
Okay, I'll give you my view. I think that if you're somebody who loves the Matt Smith era, you will love this episode because it is a perfect summation of everything in the Matt Smith era. Now, I consider the Matt Smith era to be my least favourite era of the series. So to me, it is a perfect summation of everything I don't like about the Matt Smith era.
Yes.
But I fully concede and I fully admit, if you loved those things about it, this would be a perfect regeneration. This would be for you what Planet of the Spiders was for me or what Parting of the Ways was for me. Because it does go through all the imagery and the ideas and the concepts and the tropes and the cheats and the conceits of the Matt Smith era. I think it is a wonderful summation of his era. I just don't like that era.
Look, that's fair. And I will say that it's saved somewhat for me with his speech where he talks about, we're all different people throughout our lives. And I guess people who have lived a bit, maybe not 15-year-olds, can look at that and think, yeah, like I have been different people throughout my life. And, and there's some nice lines there. And, of course, Amy walks in slow motion. I don't even like Amy, and I kind of like that moment, especially when he sees the flash of young Amy running around the TARDIS playing, and then older Amy comes down the stairs. Poor Clara gets usurped there for something awful, like she's the current companion, but it's all about Amy at that moment.
Yeah, I think it's a nice moment. I know fans, or some fans, don't like it. I think it actually is a very nice emotional moment. It does help to sum up his entire era. And although I don't much like Amy, I like Clara even less, so I don't mind her being usurped.
Yeah. And look, another thing I've jotted down that I like when his bow tie hits the floor.
Yeah.
I can't, in my head it happens in slow motion, but I don't know whether that's just me remembering it in slow motion or whether it is actually in slow motion. But just dropping that on the floor, the symbolism of that, I quite like that. It's so much better than, Love from Gallifrey Boys and all that sort of stuff, when I was just watching that mouth agape and not for good reasons.
Yeah, I was too. And it's got the conceit of the whole new set of regenerations, which... Look, it wasn't necessary at that stage. He was only the 11th Doctor. There were 2 more to go, I thought.
And I think a lot of people thought, but Moffat kind of said, oh, well, no, we're going to include these other ones, so no.
Yeah, and, that's a debate for another time.
Yes.
As I say, I think it is a very good summation of the Matt Smith era. The Matt Smith era, I think, is a very divisive era. Maybe its reputation will settle as it gets a little bit further in the memory, but... Because it was a divisive era in terms of fan opinion, I think a summation of the era is equally divisive.
Yeah, I think that's very, very fair. And even for me, there are parts of the Matt Smith era I like, and there are things the Matt Smith Doctor does that I really, really like. But there's also the complete opposite as well in every single episode. Stuff I'm just like, what the hell is this? Yuck. So yes, the regeneration falls into 2 halves for me, just like his era. One half is the love from Gallifrey, the other half is his speech and the bow tie hitting the floor. It sums it up for me as well. Perfectly.
Yeah, very, very fair. So, what does this mean for Peter Capaldi in barely a month's time?
Well, I think this is the first time we can say the Doctor's fatal injury, or whatever is going to bump him off, has happened in a separate story. When we look at all these other stories, what has killed him has happened in that story. Whether it's old age and Time of the Doctor or the radiation in End of Time and so on. So he's already had his finale in a sense. And I guess this is something you were talking about a moment ago. Maybe we can drill down a bit on that now. That he has already had his finale. He has already had his big moment. He has already had, I thought there'd be stars. What could that mean for this episode?
I think it means that there is an inherent risk in what they're doing. I understand the rationale for having a Christmas episode as they are, introducing Whittaker at the end of it. I understand the rationale. But there will always be a risk that just like we sit there with Tennant and go, he outstayed his welcome, there was a perfect moment for him to go at the end of Stolen Earth, and he didn't take it, will we always be sitting there going, I wish they'd had the regeneration at that moment where clearly I think it was meant to be. Mm. It could well be that what happens in the Christmas episode it tops that. And that would be wonderful, and I hope that that is what happens. I think it is always tough to balance a regeneration story, which is naturally funereal and doom-laden and introspective, with a Christmas episode, which are usually a bit funny, a bit out of character, a bit jaunty. That is always a bit of a risk.
Yes, and we've already seen, and we've already talked about in this episode, Moffat's comedy writing coming through. Are we thinking that maybe it's just in that scene or in a few scenes? Or are we thinking it might permeate the whole episode because it is Christmas and it is going to be fun? And Capaldi's going to be getting around with this older guy who thinks he's the old one because he is the old one. He is older than the Hartnell Doctor, but the Hartnell Doctor looks physically older, etc. Oh, hilarity ensues. Does that undercut the fact that Capaldi is actually going this time, even though it feels like he's already gone?
Are we going to see the Hartnell regeneration?
I can see the desire for them to recreate it, but I don't want them to. Is that bad?
No, sorry. Yes, it is probably bad. Is Capaldi's regeneration undercut if it's one of two in the episode?
Well, you'd think so. Or flipped on its head, the other side of the coin is the introduction of Jodie Whittaker, somewhat diminished because we're all saying, oh, look, we've seen the first Doctor regenerate.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, I suspect that it won't be. I suspect that our minds are big enough and capable enough of doing both of them and not letting the one diminish the other. But it is a risk. I guess what we're saying here is we're not sitting here going, this regeneration is doomed to failure.
No.
We're sitting here going, there are some very big risks that are involved in this regeneration. What I would like to see from the Christmas episode is a summation of the Capaldi era that builds naturally to an emotional regeneration. Mm. I suspect we won't get the first part because we've just had that. That's what More Than Enough in Time and The Doctor Falls was about. It was, again, about all these things from his era surrounding him, putting full stops at the end of them. It did it brilliantly. Like when I'm sitting there going, gee, I feel really sorry for Missy. What a great excerpt. They've done something really right. Mm. So I think it is going to be a shame that his regeneration wasn't there. I think we've talked about what makes a good one, and I think it's going to be very hard to do that, but maybe we're going to be surprised. Moffat has pulled some tricks out of the fireplace in the past. When I was completely at my lowest ebb with Doctor Who, he pulled Day of the Doctor out, and it was brilliant.
Yeah.
So he can do that again. And, Moffat with nothing to lose, going around one last time, that could be something pretty special.
Yeah, look, it could be. Just going back to, will we see the first Doctor regenerate? I'd be happy if they took it up to, he goes back to the TARDIS, he says he's wearing a bit thin, we go for a close-up on the hand, even if they put a little bit of the modern regeneration energy flowing around Hartnell's hand, I could live with that. But then the camera cuts, maybe it cuts to Capaldi's hand and the camera zooms out from there and Capaldi's got the same thing going on, then we go into the Capaldi regeneration. So we don't actually see the first Doctor regenerate, but we know they're about to do it sort of in a synchronous sort of way. I could live with that.
Yeah, I could as well. Let me say, my concern about seeing the Hartnell regeneration is only about it undercutting Capaldi. I do not think that it will undercut the 10th Planet at all. My love for Hartnell and my favouritism of Hartnell and my love of the 10th Planet is not going to be affected by what happens at Christmas. I will always love the 10th Planet. I will always love that moment. It is unimpeachable. It can't be damaged by anything that is done. And any fan that says, oh, well, he's ruined the Hartnell regeneration, no. The Hartnell regeneration is there, it exists, it doesn't get changed by something else.
I guess my biggest fear for it is that it can become very fan wank. From the point of view that, Capaldi doesn't want to regenerate. He's already said that quite clearly in the previous episode, that I'm sick of regenerating, I don't want to do it anymore. The Hartnell doctor's clearly a bit apprehensive about it being his first, and they're going to help each other out. To me, this is so fan wank. Like, let's go back to the first doctor with our current doctor and let's have them help each other and it will be lovely. Do you feel that way, that there's a strong element of fan wank to that? It's almost like a bad story in a fanzine from like 1988 or something.
It is, once again, a risk. I'm not going to prejudge it as anything more than a risk.
Yeah, it's the risk of fan wank. You
Yeah.
know, I'm certainly not saying it is because I haven't seen it. Christmas episodes are the one time a year where you can get away with that.
Yes.
But it's such a shame, and this is obviously the same with the Smithy episode as well, that Smithy had to go on a Christmas episode, so he was in the town of Christmas, and he'd stayed there for hundreds of years to help the children. And, oh, no, you ruin these doctors' last stories by having to shovel in some schmaltz for the season. I don't like that.
Yeah, I've never understood why, just because the episode is screened on Christmas Day, it has to reference Christmas. If you look at the two Goodies Christmas specials, neither of them actually mention Christmas at all. Now, okay, that was a deliberate choice on their part so that they could be repeated at any time and not just at Christmas.
Canny.
But they still do that.
Yeah, look, I know. It's not having many Christmas shows down here, Dave. Like, it might surprise people overseas to know that most of our big shows don't do Christmas episodes because, TV shows are off the air for Christmas.
Yeah, it's the middle of summer.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Blake did a story, the last episode of the Dr. Blake Mysteries, they were celebrating Christmas, but that aired in like late October or early November or something like that. It wasn't really promoted as a Christmas episode. That's about the closest we get.
Yeah, absolutely right.
So in summary for me, Dave, I'm open to what happens in the Capaldi episode, but I do have some trepidation.
Look, I agree with you, and I think what we're really saying out of all this is if that you want to look at how to do a regeneration, look at spiders, look at Legopolis, look at Parting of the Ways.
Absolutely. It can be done well.
But after this has all happened, we have got that footage of Capaldi regenerating into Whittaker. I really hope somebody does re-edit The Doctor Falls to have him fall down, say, I thought there'll be stars, and then cut to the regeneration. Someone please do that for me.